Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our webinar in partnership with AvidXchange this morning. 5 ways to prepare your AP team to operate remotely. The team at Oasis here thought this was a really important message to send out to our clients and to folks out there that are adjusting to operating business in the new normal, and wanted to help everyone understand how they can use AvidXchange and our assistance to better operate remotely with their teams now. So as we get started here today, all of our webinars have the ability to answer questions, and we want your questions. Participants will be on mute during the webinar, but put a question in the Q&A box and we'll make sure to answer it either ASAP or at the end of the webinar, where we've left some times for some questions as well. You can also use the other functions like chat and raise your hand. The presentation and the recording will all be sent out to registrants and attendees after, so if you want to share it with anybody else on your team, in your office, or through your friends and family, you can do that, as we will email everyone with a follow-up after our presentation today. I'm Aaron Rosenberg. I'm the Senior Vice President and Partner here at Oasis Solutions. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Collins from AvidXchange here shortly to take us through the majority of the content today. And again, if you have questions throughout, please let us know. So our agenda is going to be talking about the state of business continuity today and having a very candid conversation around what we're seeing as Oasis in the marketplace today, how we're helping our almost 500 clients operate in what is the new normal here. We're going to talk about the steps to implement a business continuity plan. We're talking about how AP automation helps as part of that business continuity and how Avid allows our customers to operate and ensure their AP is running smoothly from anywhere on any device as long as they can connect to the internet. And then Avid has provided a special offer today as well that Jeremy's going to speak to so that our customers can take advantage of that. And as I mentioned before, we will take questions after. So just real briefly about Oasis Solutions, if this is your first time engaging with us. I know I mentioned just a minute ago that we have about 500 clients, and we expect our clients to be on the webinar today, as well as some folks that might be new to us. So we're a value-added reseller. I've been helping customers in the mid-market evaluate, select, implement, and then support their core business management systems for 29 plus years, since 1991. We're really lucky to have some accolades and recent awards. The ones that I'm most proud about are probably our Best Places to Work awards, both in the Louisville and Kentuckiana region. And these are really my favorites because it's about my staff. My staff gets surveyed anonymously and electronically, and their enthusiasm and joy for coming to work and working for Oasis and our customers is what earns us those awards. And we all know that as a service company that our happy staff make happy clients as well. We're also really thankful to be a Fast 50 company. So that's a distinction for fast growth privately held companies in and around the Louisville area, which is where we're headquartered. And then 2, we've been on Bob Scott's Top 100 Value-Added Resellers. So that's an industry-specific award that we're really proud of and grateful for as well. We do have 700 clients that we support around 36 states. We do work on helping our clients really leverage technology to the best of their ability, helping them get that ROI out of the investment that they've made in their systems by focusing first and foremost on people and process. Technology at the end of the day is just a tool that should help make your people and processes more productive. And we also have, as I mentioned, great staff members, CPAs on staff. We don't do public accounting, tax, and audit, but we do have CPAs because we understand that helping clients to get into the business transactions and understand the accounting ramifications are really critical for their business operations. And we also have former CFOs, controllers, folks that have worked on the other side of the implementation table. So they've been in business and they can really consult on those best practices and helping our clients leverage those systems to make those best practices run smoothly and to automate efficiencies within their business. We have over 350 years of combined experience across those staff members. So now I'm going to unshare my screen here and let Jeremy take over as he runs through the business continuity messaging. And Jeremy, we are seeing your screen appear now.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the introduction, Aaron, and good morning, everyone. So as per the agenda, we're going to start off by looking at the state of business continuity today. And as you can see, the first stat we're going to look at represents companies that were surveyed at the beginning of March. So nearly 34% of those companies surveyed had no business continuity plan in place. Obviously, a lot of us have had to learn on the fly if we didn't have one. But less than half of those business continuity plans accounted for emergencies across multiple geographic areas simultaneously. What we had seen in the market prior to the beginning of March was business continuity plans that accounted for disaster in a specific area. If you have multiple locations, potentially providing a disaster recovery plan for one location, but not a lot of businesses prepared for the new normal. And then 22% feel they have a plan that can sustain their business for more than 2 months. So not a lot of high confidence in the plans that were in place in March. But we obviously have had a little bit of time to work through this. Aaron, what have you seen or heard or even done yourself as a business owner working through a business continuity plan since the beginning of March?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeremy. So what we've seen and heard is all over the board. We've got quite a few mutual clients already. So those that had more automation in place through not only their payables department, but their receivables, et cetera, are operating pretty much as business as usual, depending, of course, on the type of business that they're in, particularly for a service business like us, where we had a great deal of our employees already set up to work from home. We had very little logistical challenges there to get business continuity going. However, I will tell you, we do have a great many of those 500 to 600 clients still on-premise solutions. And so they have been struggling more than normal because they have so much impact on trying to VPN and the frustrations that can come from the slowness of trying to get into some of their systems. So that's been tough, and we have helped customers also connect with other managed service providers as well for not only those connections into their core systems, but also helping them operate and get up on disaster recovery plans and things of that nature, security measures that need to be in place as well. From our NetSuite customer perspective, again, for the great majority of them, I haven't heard a peep. So because it's a cloud offering, like Avid is as well, they were already operating at home just fine as long as they can keep the internet going. And I think that's the big concern for anybody, as long as your kids aren't on Netflix and on their Nintendos and things like that as well, taking your bandwidth out, it's just fine. Your business continuity is pretty much business as normal.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about NetSuite. But to your point on the kids, it's been funny that the kids in my house have actually complained that their bandwidth has slowed down, and we've had to explain to them why. With everyone working from home now, so.
Well, even with I'd say, I've just started recently, this last week, started to put in different passwords for our Zoom accounts. They got some bad PR on the amount of people using Zoom that were unprotected. So helping them too with things that are out of the box with NetSuite, like two-factor authentication and other ways to make sure that they're secure, and that, again, the business can operate as normal. But it's been very interesting, right, for the last month. It seems like it's been longer how quickly things have changed. But yeah, I think that we've seen for a great deal of those clients, not a lot of changes, which has been good.
Right. Yeah, no, that is good, and certainly something we've all had to account for and learn as we go. So next, we have a poll question. We certainly want to hear from you. What have you been affected, or what have you done in terms of business continuity plans since the beginning of March? So you should have the poll on your screen with a couple of options to select from, and we'd certainly like to get your feedback there. We'll give it just a couple seconds for everyone to answer.
Yeah, I think also what we've seen with a lot of our clients are on that small emerging mid-market size, right? So they're too big for QuickBooks, too small for SAP, which is where NetSuite and our Sage product have been a great fit for them. And so business continuity isn't really something that they had prepared for. You know, as I mentioned, we have a lot of our customers that outsource those critical IT functions. They might have one person in the IT seat or a small team. Oftentimes we see the CFO or controllers also wearing that hat too. So that's another just indication that as they look to us as a trusted resource to help, you know, we're more than willing to help where we can. And if it's not the right fit in our wheelhouse, connect them with the right resources so that they can operate as normal as possible.
Right. We have a follow-up poll question to our first. But to your point, Aaron, you know, you mentioned some of the clients that have an on-premise solution, and I imagine that, you know, coming into this, as we saw from some of the statistics, that's probably the hardest business to really define a business continuity plan for. You know, you're hopeful that VPN is fast enough and that you have other processes in place. So I think business continuity extends beyond just access to an ERP. Sometimes we don't account for every aspect of our business until we realize, oh, we needed to account for that.
Yeah, well, who knew you need to account for who's going to go into the office and see if there's any checks in the mail today, right?
Right,
that was
exactly.
something that a lot of customers had put on their disaster recovery checklist. It's something that, you know, we have a rotation of a couple of the leadership team members who live near the office. I haven't been in almost a month now, going in and looking for if there are any checks, and luckily there are on most cases. And we are offering our clients as another, you know, indication of how we can change and make it easier to do business with us. We used to traditionally charge a percentage increase for taking credit card payments, right? And so we have now said, hey, we will take a credit card with no additional charge. We'll take on those processing fees just to make it easier to do business with us, so they don't have to worry about printing checks. Right. And so that's one way that they can easily do business with us. Obviously, we'll talk about here the ability to do ACHs and different types of payments electronically, but not everybody's on Avid, so not everybody has that ability to make those payments. Same thing for us. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of companies that, you know, prior to this wouldn't even think of accepting electronic payment. You know, they were still kind of, no, checks are the way we've always done it, so that's the way we'll continue to do it.
Right.
They didn't believe checks were going away. Now they're in a situation where, you know, how do they print their checks? And you know, did someone take home a check printer? You know, or do we have to send someone into the office every day to do that? So, you know, certainly a lot of things to think about, which kind of leads us to our next slide, which is 5 actionable steps. Certainly the first one being identify the resources, and then categorize the issues and severity. So really examining the business as a whole across every department, looking at potential issues and what in the event of, in this case, a disaster that affects everyone and not just regionally. Define the risks and impact. How will it impact your business? Are you prepared for such an impact? I've spoken with companies over the course of the last month that, it's scary for some because they didn't have a plan in place or didn't factor in, this type of situation, and they were worried about, being able to sustain their business, for more than 70 days if things didn't change. And here we are a month and a half into it, and it's coming up on 70 days. So I know it can be scary for some. We also have align your risk mitigation strategies. So making sure that the plan that you've outlined is one that you can put in place. And then, of course, educate and train. Just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be effective if your staff members and team aren't aware of the plan and can follow it as outlined. In terms of identifying the right resources in the department, it's always good from a business continuity standpoint to have one person running point, so who's in charge of the plan, but also making sure that you have other members on the team. You don't want to just leave it to one person, but it's always good to have one person running point, I think, with any project as well. And if there's an emergency, what across the organization will be affected? Obviously, companies had plans in place to be able to access the ERP, but like you mentioned, Aaron, they didn't necessarily have plans in place or think about how am I going to get my money coming in, or how am I going to make my payments, or even, I get invoices mailed to the office. I'm not going to necessarily do a change of address to someone's house. How do we account for that, especially in areas where they have, mandated stay at home and you can't even get to the office? So, certainly things to think about across all aspects of the business, and really defining which ones are most mission critical.
Right.
So some of the other areas that we certainly recommend be looked at in terms of a business continuity plan, technology, staff, workplace, ransomware. There are a number of other things that I'm sure other companies have come up with as they've really navigated through these times. But if we look at it, from a technology standpoint, for example, what happens in the event of a power outage? Or if we do have to work from home, do our staff members have sufficient bandwidth? What does the internet look like? Things that we've already addressed or talked about, but certainly things that you don't really necessarily think of until you're actually doing those things or in the middle of it. Hardware disruptions, again, for those companies that had solutions that were on-prem, it's pretty significant hardware disruption if they're reliant on a check printer that's in the office. Again, like we've talked about, do they take a check printer?
Right.
What do they do? And now companies are scrambling to try and enroll, suppliers, for example, into an e-payment, but they don't necessarily, did those companies roll over their phones to home phones? It's a matter of getting a hold of someone in order to do that. So there's a number of things to consider as you go through just laying out a plan. Then you want to look at the risks and the impact on the process, internal and external fraud. Certainly, checks have always been big fraud business for counterfeiters, but probably more so now than they ever have been. Just knowing that companies are struggling to adapt. Payment delays. There have been organizations that have indicated they expected all of their payments to be delayed as a result of what they're working through. Some of their suppliers are lenient in that, and others are, hey, we've had to adjust, why couldn't you? And so they're getting hit with penalties.
Mm-hmm.
There's also payment processing errors. As people work from home, there are other distractions that they have to be worried about. I mentioned kids in my house. You find yourself being pulled away to help with certain things that in the office you normally wouldn't. And so there's more potential for processing errors. And of course, inaccessible accounting documents. Where's that invoice? So it's sitting in the filing cabinet at the office and I don't have it digitized, so I can't go back and review it. Not sure exactly how it should be coded or how we coded it last time, things of that nature. And I'm sure there are other things, Aaron, that you can think of that, may not necessarily be covered here, but these are just again, some of the things that we've learned as we go through this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what we think about is, like most people, who's touching what, if someone's going in, are they the only person in the office? Right. And so being able to completely remove the physical necessity of, going in and opening the mail and keying in the invoices, for example, or the receivables, right? That's how we have had to formulate a new normal, which is very different than I think most people's plans for business continuity.
Right. And then we look at, on top of that, kind of the plans that they do have and whether or not they can execute on them. It's one thing to have a plan and it's another to be able to execute on it, right? So if you were to ask businesses, yes, we have a plan, some companies forget to really lay out an execution plan on it.
Yeah, the health and safety of the employee, right, wasn't typically included in a lot of these disaster recovery and security plans.
Right.
Just right, unless there was somebody really, I think, like maybe if you kind of analogize to a disaster, an earthquake experience, something like that. What if we couldn't get to the server? What if the server went down? Those types of things. Which of course with the applications and the SaaS applications like NetSuite, they've got that covered. So that's a way to outsource that whole necessary plan, because there's a co-location, disaster recovery is built into the subscription. That's what I'm seeing more and more businesses. I don't think any businesses today, if someone's going to start a new business today, is going to worry about purchasing, maintaining hardware as part of their business strategy. They just want to operate.
Right. Yep. Totally agree. And you talk about, disaster recovery and, planning for, let's say, an illness or the health and safety of the employees. We oftentimes we will see that business continuity plans account for maybe someone in the process getting sick, but not necessarily potentially affecting everyone in the process. So how do you maintain business if, while you try to navigate and account for health and safety of your employees, right? So certainly a lot
Sure.
to think about that I think companies, at least that I had seen prior to this, hadn't really put extra thought into. They had thought about it, but it again, laying out a full-scale plan wasn't top of mind. They felt they had a sufficient plan going in. As far as deploying and executing on the plan, certainly providing the teams with the right resources. Do they have equipment to be able to work from home in this situation? I know of companies that scrambled, were ordering laptops kind of last minute, hopefully supply was available as they tried to get their staff set up to work from home. What redundancy is in place. We've talked a little bit about that. And then consider automating key components of the process. And in this case, we're talking more towards the AP process, but that can be any of your processes across the business as you really look at how you operate. And then educate and train your staff. Make sure that the staff is aware of the plan. It's one thing to have a plan. It's another thing to make sure when you execute on it, that the staff is fully trained and aware. Schedule training sessions, always helpful. And again, we're not, unfortunately, it would have been nice to have done all this prior to March, but you make do with what you can. And so certainly, even at this point, I'm not sure anyone would really hesitate to attend a training session on business continuity if it were to be scheduled now. So if you haven't done this, certainly something we recommend. Include role-playing scenarios. Just make sure that you cover, potential areas or scenarios that even if it seems crazy, like what we're going through now probably wasn't really a top of mind thing. We never really thought about it, but we need to make sure we account for all scenarios. And then, of course, simulated disaster test. You want to make sure that you at least put your plan to the test, even if you're just simulating the disaster, to make sure that you can execute across the business on your plan. So again, just kind of a recap of those actionable steps: identify the resources, categorize issues and severity, define the risks and impact to the business, align your risk mitigation strategies, and then educate and train and run tests. As far as the accounts payable processes within a business continuity plan, certainly automation is one way, and probably the best way for companies to be able to manage business continuity across the AP process. If we look at some of the additional stats in terms of companies that were interviewed and answered or surveyed, as far as what they were looking at coming into this, 54% said working from home would have significant to extremely high impact on their finance team's ability to process invoices. Well, certainly that 54% has had to find a way, as I mentioned, because it's the way businesses had to work or operate under the new normal. So certainly there are ways out there that can help. AP automation is one of those. So some of the benefits of automating the AP process: provides a central hub for all employees to be able to access files from anywhere, anytime, any device. Aaron, you mentioned earlier, as long as there's an internet connection, something like AP automation or AvidXchange is a benefit, as long as they can access it. You can create customized automated workflows. So even if you don't have employees in the office, from an automation standpoint, AvidXchange and the AP automation process will allow you to send invoices, capture them, send them through customized workflows, regardless of where the employee is, home, beach, wherever they may have drifted to during this time. Sophisticated reports are just buttons away. Instead of having to go to the file cabinet and pull out invoices past and current, you can run those reports without having to manage spreadsheets and email those around. Electronic payments, we've talked about that. It's harder and harder for companies to be able to issue checks these days, unless they've really set themselves up with a check printer, but even then, in some instances, you print a check and okay, now someone needs to sign it, because it's probably not the CFO that normally would sign it that took the check printer home and is doing that. So now we're relying on mailing things around the country versus walking over to someone's office. So a lot of risk there too when you're sending checks around to get them signed.
Well, and the separation of duties is a big piece for a lot of our clients as well. So that requires that you have multiple people involved in that process. Right?
Absolutely.
And now they're all disconnected and not in the same office together. So they need the tools in place to make sure that they can continue to separate duties and have accounting best practices remotely.
Correct. Yep. It's a great point. And then, service teams that can help improve the supplier relationships. AvidXchange has a team of employees that are just dedicated to, working with suppliers, educating them on the process, best practices, the benefits of electronic payments, as well as electronic invoicing. So, as far as the what AP automation looks like, AvidXchange has processed 12 million payments annually through the software. We have over 1,400 employees. 400 of those service members are dedicated, as I mentioned, to a payment onboarding and processing. So they're working directly with suppliers every day. That's their whole business. We're adding about 1,000 suppliers per week, and we've actually seen that uptick in the last 3 weeks for obvious reasons. We have over 600,000 active suppliers in our network. That means those are suppliers or vendors that have identified, how they want to be paid for their process, and we help them adapt as well to these times. So it's not just, hey, we're, send it here. It's, we need Avid to help us adapt as well. And we've been able to do that with the suppliers. So companies utilizing the AvidXchange software have been able to take advantage of the fact that we can adapt as we move along. We integrated to 150 accounting systems, most notably NetSuite and Sage and some others. And then we have over 5,500 total clients using our software in some capacity. When we talk about automation, there are 2 automation solutions, invoice and payment. Both are represent the full AP process. So from an invoice side, what we're doing is allowing companies to really eliminate the manual process of an invoice workflow. So typically, someone in the office would have received an invoice by mail. They open it, determine who's responsible for it, and then route it to that person for approval. Then it gets routed back to AP for entry, and then of course entered into the accounting system and posted, and then they select a payment method. With automation, we're simplifying that process down to 3 steps. Really business, what we consider business operational steps: the coding, approving, and selecting. Selecting is when you actually want to pay it. We've seen certainly a straight-through processing improvement of 2.5 times for companies that have elected to automate the AP process. There are 3 ways to get invoices into the system. So businesses can email their invoice in. They can upload invoices. And then, of course, last scenario, especially right now, is probably the paper PO box. But once the invoice comes in, we're able to capture certain data elements off of that invoice. We present the full image of the invoice in those data fields to the organization that the invoice is intended to. And those invoices are placed into workflow scenarios. So the first time that an organization would see an invoice, it's at the first level within an approval workflow process. Someone is notified by email that invoices are in their inbox. And so they're able to click on the invoice, see it in whole as if they had received it in the mail themselves, and then also see the data elements that had been extracted off of it, which will in turn end up creating the bill within the accounting system. So it gives them the opportunity to review it and work it through the approval process without having to physically touch an invoice. This is the invoice collection and review screen. So I mentioned that someone would be notified and they would see a list of the invoices that they're responsible for. This is what that screen looks like. And then, of course, they see the full image of the invoice and have the ability to code it before sending it on to the next approver. From a payment standpoint, the AvidPay network, as I mentioned, we have a team of suppliers that are enrolling vendors into an e-payment solution every day. We have over 600,000 suppliers submitting invoices and receiving payments every month. So companies are able to take advantage of the power of a true network environment. So you can see at day 1, we have an average of 28% supplier coverage, meaning a company that just first signs on with AvidXchange, we typically see almost 30% of their vendors are already in our network working with us. And so it's a great advantage to be able to from day 1 take advantage, to start with that ratio. There are different methods available for suppliers. We have MasterCard, so we spin up a one-time use virtual card. as a form of e-payment. It's in the amount that the payment is for. They can only use it one time. AvidXchange users don't establish credit with us, so there's no hit to your credit. Again, it's because of the relationship we have with MasterCard, we're able to spin that up for a one-time use virtual card spend. We also have Avid Pay Direct, which is a ACH function. And then, of course, check for those companies that still elect to be paid by check. A number of other factors, but again, the power of the network truly is being able to leverage vendors across multiple industries that are already taking advantage of either submitting invoices or receiving payment through the AvidXchange software. As far as the AvidPay network and the process, how it works, when you get up to the point of selecting, so if you remember that workflow and the 3 steps we help drive towards, the selection process is the payment process. So you're generating the payment. And as that payment process begins, you're simply submitting a payment file to AvidXchange. We pull the money from the account. So itemized deductions from your account in the amount of the payments that you've selected to be paid. And then we make the payment to the vendor on your behalf in one of the forms in which the vendor or supplier has selected to be paid by. And then we send all of that reconciliation data back to you for the accounting system updates and things of that nature. So much like an online bill pay, Aaron, where if you've ever used that for paying utilities or different things, logged on to your bank portal, very much like that, you simply just enter in the payment information and we take care of the rest.
And that's a good question about those automatic payments too. So we get questions from our customers about recurring payments for things just like utilities, right, Jeremy?
Right.
And so I want to ask you guys, I'm sure a lot of your clients are using that functionality as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we have a separate function for utility payments, understanding that there's a timeliness in getting a utility payment out. So anytime a utility payment is part of a payment run, we pull those out separately and treat them differently, making sure that those payments get to the utility companies on time. But certainly utility payments are a big portion of what we do when we're talking about AP automation.
Yeah, and internet service providers, are so critical today as well. And you know, I think even though we're not in the office, we're working with the landlords and everybody else to make sure that when we get back to normal, things are ready and operational.
Right, exactly. So that leads us that leads us to the special offer we wanted to extend today. So we'll kind of walk through this. It's a no-cost quick setup in year 1. Also, if you sign up by May 30th to take advantage of the offer, from a business continuity standpoint, it'll be no expenses for the first 12 months. So out of the box, what we're doing is offsetting any costs that would have occurred as a special offer, again, before May 30th. And we have a remote setup and configuration services that can get companies up and running in as few as 14 days. With as little as 5 to 10 hours of your time. We've seen it go quicker, but considering, you know, there's still some uncertainty around when all of this might end, you know, to be able to know that your AP process could be up and operational if you're struggling today within 14 days you know, would certainly be huge. So again, just to recap, no costs in year 1, offsetting costs if you sign up by May 30th. So whether it's for setup or the operational side of it, no cost to the client for taking advantage of this business continuity offer, and we can have you up and running within 14 days. We have one more poll question, and then after the poll question, we'll finish out with any Q&A session. The poll question should be on your screen now, and we'll give everyone a few minutes to answer.
And Jeremy, what have you all experienced over these last few weeks or month? Have you seen an uptick in opportunities coming through, as people may have had this on the back burner, but now it's so much more critical and timely for them to get started?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you ask, because we have seen scenarios where companies had, for example, committed to using an AP automation solution with us, but they were kind of holding off on implementing. And then as soon as all of this hit, you know, they were on the phones with us. Okay, we want to get this going right now. And so where it had taken them several months to even, you know, do some of the things that we need to have happen in order to get them up and running, they were, you know, chomping at the bit to get it going as soon as possible at that point. So we have seen an uptick, not only in, you know, companies that were already committed, wanting to get it implemented, but companies that didn't have a plan in place, looking for a way to be able to manage the business going forward as well.
Yeah. So let's move on to a little Q&A here, because I do have some questions. One that's always seems to come up is, let's start maybe from our NetSuite client's perspective. How is Avid priced? Can you talk about how you guys come up with the right deal size for these customers, both for maybe the whole offering and then just for the invoice transactions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off by saying Avid is not a all or nothing solution. So that's one of the benefits of, you know, what we offer.
Yeah, something our clients really appreciate too. I think we've got, you know, probably a dozen or more, you know, mutual clients using Avid in different ways.
Right, right.
And some that have stepped into the complete solution.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we talk about kind of how we're priced across the board, we're very much transactionally based, and there's a good reason for that. We don't charge for user licenses. We really, our business philosophy is you should only pay for what you use. So you're only charged for the amount of for the number of transactions you send through the system, whether that's an invoice that you're routing for approval or payments that you're managing in the software. That's really what we're charging for. But you can have as many users as you want within the software. It's really it's designed to scale with companies. So we've seen companies with very few invoices and payments be able to leverage the power of our services, and companies with thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of invoices and payments a month be able to manage with it, again, because they know that they're going to be paying for what they use.
Yeah, and one of the things that our customers really appreciate too, and what we look for in a good partner, is the fact that our NetSuite customers can access Avid, and it's a bundle install. So it's really simple for us as a service provider to have Avid be able to install that bundle and set it up so quickly for them.
Yeah, and that's one of the other advantages to our solution with with NetSuite, for example, is a lot of our integration is built on the NetSuite platform. So NetSuite still is retained as the system of record. We're simply enhancing what NetSuite has to offer in allowing for an automated solution.
So we have another question about the workflows. So you mentioned, right, Avid has workflows available to really help with that approval process. And I've seen some pretty complex ones with clients, especially our larger or growth-oriented clients that are having to put those best practices in place. Obviously, NetSuite has a workflow engine as well. Can you talk a little bit about how Avid enhances that ability?
Sure. So in the case of the Avid for NetSuite solution, you could actually leverage both. So we're not displacing NetSuite's workflows. When an invoice comes in, those can be routed through the Avid solution for approvals. You can configure them based on the vendor that submitted the invoice, dollar amounts. They can be routed to different individuals based on location. So you have a number of factors where you can configure workflow approvals there. And then we take that data, put it into NetSuite, creating a bill, and then you can still leverage NetSuite's workflows if you want to be able to route the bill for approval inside of NetSuite. So we're just extending your ability to manage workflows. We're not displacing NetSuite when it comes to workflows. We also have a PO match. So if you initiated your purchasing process with a purchase order in NetSuite, when the invoice data comes in, we will match that up to the purchase order in NetSuite. And so that, we're linking the invoice to the purchase order and an items receipt page, for example, to help facilitate a three-way match process as well.
Great, yeah, and I think what the last question here is pertaining to the payment networks, and I've heard this one before. They ask who all is in the payment network, because I've gotten a lot of I guess feedback from prospects and clients that, oh, none of my vendors would opt into a payment network like that, where then Avid has had the ability to run a vendor analysis for the clients pretty quickly, and shown and proven out that there's a certain percentage, sometimes upwards of 30-40% of their vendors that are already in that payment network. Can you talk a little bit about how that process goes when you're going through an evaluation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fair question because, as you mentioned, we hear it too. A lot of companies, oh, I doubt my vendors are small, or I doubt that they would utilize this. Earlier in the presentation, I talked about one of the stats being 28% from day one. That 28% represents an average of companies that, for every company that signs on to use Avid, we find 28% of their vendors are already in our network. We have varying degrees of size of vendors. So anything from, small business up through larger organizations. And as far as a vendor match, if there's concern around, oh, my vendors may not be utilizing something like this, if an organization, if a prospect or someone interested in using AvidXchange could provide us with just some basic details around the vendors that they pay, usually company name and address, for example, we can run a vendor analysis, like you mentioned, Aaron. That vendor analysis usually can be returned within a day or two, but we can then really define a percentage of how many are already in our network. Yeah, and so, like I said, we don't have a problem sharing that information once we do get a return, so that companies understand that, where they thought they may not have been able to get some of their vendors signed on for an e-payment, for example, we can show them to the contrary that that they're already those vendors are already receiving electronic payments elsewhere, and so now they would for you as well.
Yeah, it helps them quickly calculate that ROI too, looking at amount of payment and transactions that they go through to those approved vendors that are already in the network and have already opted in. So I think that's something that pretty quickly can get people over the hump, and we've seen that as a powerful tool in the past. Well, so I think that's all we have time for today. Of course, we're more than willing to help take additional questions at a later time. You can reach out to myself and or Jeremy to help you with that. And so we really appreciate the participation and attendance today. We want to help businesses with their continuity plans. We want to make sure that it's easy and efficient to work from anywhere these days and in the future as well, even though we all hope to be able to go back into the office soon.
Right. Aaron, I appreciate your time with us today as well, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone. Stay healthy and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.